Imagine waking up in a luxurious mansion in Palm Beach, opening the curtains and bam! There's a giant ship stranded in your backyard. You know, that's exactly what happened to Molly Wilmot, an eccentric socialite who turned a maritime disaster into a glamorous social event. How did that ship end up there? And what did Molly do next? Well, sit tight, because this is yet another unbelievable story that I'm about to tell you. Palm Beach has always been synonymous with luxury, power, and exclusivity. But among all the figures who graced the scene, one stood out more than any other: Molly Wilmot. Just hearing her name, you knew something grand was about to happen. And with Molly, it always did. Her mansion? Well, Molly Wilmot's home wasn't just a house, it was a masterpiece of opulence. A massive oceanfront property where luxury blended seamlessly with her impeccable sense of style. Every corner of the mansion oozed wealth: marble columns imported from Italy, French crystal chandeliers, and furniture that looked like it had been stolen from a European palace. Passing through the massive iron gates adorned with gold arabesques, visitors were immediately enveloped by a symphony of extravagant details. The gardens were a spectacle of their own, meticulously manicured and filled with rare flowers imported from around the world. The scent of jasmine mixed with the ocean breeze created a fairy tale atmosphere, or a nightmare waiting to happen. Molly, of course, loved showing off her property. Strolling across the polished wooden deck with a glass of champagne in hand, she would often say with a proud smile, "Here, I control every detail. Nothing happens without my knowing." But that morning, something was about to happen. Something that not even her money, influence, or meticulous control could have prevented. The enormous living room with floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the ocean. To Molly, that endless blue sea represented tranquility and absolute dominance over her little seaside empire. But the sea, unpredictable as always, had other plans. Molly used to say she could predict the weather just by watching the glimmer of the waves. Too bad that on this morning, she was too distracted by her own perfection to notice the signs that something was very, very wrong. The night before, everything was going according to plan. Molly, as always, was surrounded by luxury and attention. Her mansion, strategically lit to highlight every detail of its flawless decor, was being prepped for an exclusive photo shoot the next day. Pictures that would be featured in Palm Beach's top social magazines. Every step of the way, Molly inspected the tiniest details: the sparkle of the chandeliers, the alignment of the sofas, even the scent of the fresh flowers. In the arrangements, everything had to be absolutely perfect. Glancing at her reflection in the golden mirror of the grand salon, she said with a satisfied tone, "Tomorrow will be spectacular, and as always, I will be the star." But while Molly basked in her own glory, outside, in the calm waters of the Atlantic, forces far beyond her control were in motion. A storm was forming on the horizon. The night dragged on lazily, and the wind began to blow a little stronger than usual. In the mansion's quarters, the staff whispered quietly about the weather that seemed ready to change. But who would dare suggest that Molly cancel her plans? And so, the socialite retired for the night, confident she'd wake up to another perfect day. Little did she know that, in just a few hours, her meticulously organized world would be turned upside down. Molly was so meticulous about her image that she used to practice her smiles in front of the mirror before any event. But not even her rehearsed smiles could hide the shock awaiting her at sunrise. On January 1st, 1984, it was supposed to be just another perfect day in Palm Beach. The golden sun reflected on the crystal-clear waters, the mansion's gardens were pristine, and the aroma of gourmet coffee filled the luxurious halls of Molly Wilmot's home. She, as always, was all ready, up early, inspecting every detail before the much-anticipated photo shoot. Everything had to live up to her reputation. While the staff moved with military precision, Molly picked out her favorite jewelry for the occasion, deciding which one would send the perfect message of elegance and sophistication. To her, every detail mattered, from the exact position of the chairs on the veranda to the way the curtains fluttered in the ocean breeze. Outside, the private beach stretched out in a flawless line of white sand, contrasting with the deep blue of the ocean. The photographers were on their way, and Molly felt that familiar pleasure of having everything under control. Or so she thought. Molly believed perfection was in the smallest details, to the point of instructing her gardeners to align every leaf of the palm trees surrounding her mansion before any major event. The morning was unfolding perfectly at Molly Wilmot's mansion until a murmur of unease began spreading among the staff. First, it was the gardener, who dropped his pruning shears and froze, staring at the ocean. Then, the housekeeper abandoned the perfectly aligned cushions and ran to the veranda, covering her mouth in shock. Inside, Molly, still busy with the preparations, heard a faint commotion coming from outside. Annoyed, she glared at her assistant. "What on earth is going on now? If it's another early photographer, tell them to wait." The assistant swallowed hard. "Mrs. Wilmot, I think you'd better see this for yourself." Intrigued, Molly walked with firm steps toward the massive panoramic window in the main living room. She dramatically pulled back the French linen curtains, ready to give one of her famous scoldings. But when she looked at the horizon, what she saw made her heart skip a beat. There, absurdly out of place against the paradise-like scenery of Palm Beach, was a ship, and not one of the elegant yachts that usually glided along Florida's coast. No, it was a massive Venezuelan cargo ship, rusty, tilted, and absurdly close to the beach, practically anchored in the backyard of her luxurious property. Molly blinked, unable to believe her eyes. "What? What the hell is that?" she muttered, adjusting her diamond-encrusted sunglasses as if a clearer view would make the scene less absurd. The silence in the room was almost palpable, until one of the staff members, with a tone of disbelief, ventured, "I think it is stranded, ma'am." Molly slowly turned, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and disdain. "Stranded? In my backyard?" Molly was known for her obsessive attention to detail, and that sight, a giant rusting cargo ship ruining her impeccable view, was the kind of thing that simply wasn't in her manual of perfection. Outside, neighbors were beginning to gather, some laughing, others snapping photos. The chaos was only just beginning. Meanwhile, Molly remained frozen, staring at the massive, rusty structure now dominating her ocean view. The Venezuelan cargo ship, grotesquely tilted, seemed to mock her, like an unwelcome guest with no intention of leaving. Outside, staff and neighbors were gathering on the beach, pointing and whispering. Molly, always composed, adjusted her silk robe and, with a heavy sigh, opened the glass doors leading to the pool. The salty smell of the ocean mingled with the faint lavender scent of her perfectly groomed gardens, but now everything felt out of place. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilmot," said a curious neighbor holding a golden pair of binoculars. "Looks like your house got a new accessory." Molly gave her a quick, calculated glance. Her socialite instincts kicked in, and with a tense smile she replied, "Good morning, dear. Let's just say coastal decor has gone too far this time." As she tried to process what she was seeing, one of her staff members came running, looking panicked. "Ma'am, the crew. They're still on board." Molly frowned. Crew? What crew? There they were, a group of exhausted-looking sailors leaning against the ship's railing, staring at Molly's mansion as if they'd just stumbled upon an oasis. They waved hesitantly, and one of them, in a gesture that was almost diplomatic, held up a small improvised white flag. Within minutes, journalists began arriving, drawn by rumors that a Palm Beach socialite now had a cargo ship in her backyard. News agencies were already calling frantically, asking for an official statement. Molly, instead of panicking, kept her composure and murmured to herself, "Well, I've seen worse invasions. At least they're not trying to sell me real estate." The chaos was only just beginning, and Molly knew she had to act quickly before her reputation sank along with that stranded ship. As the crowd of curious onlookers grew on the beach, Molly, holding her cup of coffee with a sharp, analytical look, studied the giant hunk of metal planted in her backyard. Honestly, I'd be freaking out if I were in her shoes, calling lawyers or demanding immediate removal. But Molly had other plans. She turned to her loyal butler, Charles, who was watching the scene with pure horror. "Charles, dear, bring out my best silver tray. We're going to welcome our guests." Charles hesitated. "Ma'am? Guests?" Molly smirked, adjusted her sunglasses, and replied, "Oh, darling, it's not every day an entire ship decides to pay us a visit, is it? Let's turn this into something special." Reluctantly, Charles obeyed, and Molly descended to the sand with all the grace a Palm Beach socialite could muster, even in the face of a rusty cargo ship and a bewildered crew. "Welcome to my humble abode," she exclaimed, waving to the Venezuelan sailors who exchanged confused glances. One of the crew members, a thin man with a sparse mustache, hesitantly climbed down, looking like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. Molly, ever the dramatist, pointed at the ship and said, "You know, this is the biggest Mercedes anyone's ever had in their backyard." The crew burst into nervous laughter, while Molly took charge of the situation with charm and charisma. Not only did Molly keep her composure, But she also served champagne to the journalists who were now flocking to the scene. She wanted to ensure this story was told the right way. In other words, her way. By this point, reporters and photographers were firing off questions, trying to understand how such a refined woman could handle a disaster like this so peculiarly. Molly responded with a sparkle in her eyes. Darlings, when life gives you lemons, you serve champagne and invite friends. Within hours, reporters, cameramen, and curious locals flooded the golden sands of Palm Beach. And at the center of it all? Molly Wilmot, completely in control of the situation, as if she were hosting a gala, not dealing with a maritime accident. With a calculated smile and her signature wide-brimmed hat, Molly welcomed journalists with the same elegance she'd show to guests at a luxury cocktail party. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you brought your cameras, because today we're putting on a show worthy of Palm Beach. Flashbulbs popped as she posed strategically next to the stranded cargo ship, ensuring her best angles were immortalized. After all, if life hands you a shipwreck, why not turn it into a magazine cover? The Venezuelan crew, initially suspicious, soon joined in on the fun. Molly made sure to offer them beachwear. After all, if you're going to be stranded, you might as well do it in style. Before long, they too were giving interviews, posing for photos, and even accepting trinkets from tourists who came to see the spectacle firsthand. Meanwhile, the city of Palm Beach buzzed with gossip, and of course Molly's neighbors, those who pretended not to like her, were green with envy. After all, who needs a Rolls-Royce when you've got a giant cargo ship in your backyard? Naturally, not everyone found the situation amusing. Local authorities began pressuring Molly to address the issue. "Mrs. Wilmot, we need to take this seriously," said one police officer, watching tourists snap selfies with the ship in the background. "Darling, I'm taking this very seriously," Molly replied with a calculated smile. "Have you seen this week's Vogue cover?" But jokes aside, the situation was spiraling out of control. The crew of the Mercedes. "I didn't have official permission to remain on the beach, the area's security was compromised, and the neighbors' patience was wearing thin. Officials even considered dismantling the ship right there, but the million-dollar question remained. Who was going to pay for it? Molly, of course, wasn't interested in footing the bill. Instead, she had one more goal: to milk every second of her newfound fame. While the authorities scrambled for a solution, Molly Wilmot was busy giving interviews and toasting the sunset with journalists eager for more extravagant headlines. If Molly thought having a ship in her backyard was just another chance to make headlines in the social columns, she was about to discover that the reality was far more complicated. After all, the Mercedes. I wasn't just any cargo ship. It was a walking disaster. Built in the 1950s, the Mercedes I had seen better days, or so they said. A Venezuelan ship that, in its glory days, crossed the Atlantic carrying precious cargo. But time doesn't forgive, and with it came mechanical failures, makeshift repairs, and empty promises of, "This time it'll work." The ship had already experienced at least 4 breakdowns before its final disaster. It was practically begging to get stuck somewhere. It just didn't expect that somewhere to be Molly Wilmot's backyard. The residents of Palm Beach whispered among themselves. Who was the owner of this rusting hunk of metal? Why wasn't it out at sea, where it belonged? And, most importantly, how could something that big just lose its way and end up here? To Molly, however, these technical details were secondary. Her main concern at the moment was ensuring the media captured her best side in the photos. How did this ship end up there? Well, this is where the story gets even more interesting. On the night before the grounding, winds lashed the Florida coast with unusual force. The Mercedes Yuan, already weakened by years of neglect, struggled against the furious waves. The captain, a man with a perpetually worried expression, was doing his best to keep control. But fate had other plans. "Captain, we've lost the anchor!" shouted one of the crew members, panic written all over his face. With no anchor and an engine sputtering more than it should, the ship became a prisoner of the currents. The crew knew there was nothing more they could do. When the first rays of daylight illuminated Palm Beach's coastline, there it was, stranded. Like a giant rusting statue, with a horrified socialite staring from her veranda and dozens of cameras ready for the spectacle. And then the real problem surfaced. No one seemed to know exactly how to remove the massive thing. If Molly had once been known for her flawless home and exclusive parties, The main highlight of her property now was a monstrous hunk of rusting metal blocking her ocean view. "This is absurd," Molly exclaimed, glaring at the ship as a group of reporters gathered at her gates. "I live in Palm Beach, not a shipyard." But it wasn't just the visual nuisance. The ship had become a social problem. Angry neighbors called Molly daily, complaining about the negative impact on the neighborhood's sophisticated image. Her dream beachfront estate now looked more like an abandoned harbor. And while Molly loved being the center of attention, this kind of attention wasn't part of the plan. Even worse, removing a ship of that size would cost a fortune, and neither local authorities nor the ship's owners seemed eager to foot the bill. In the following weeks, tourists began flocking to see Molly's ship. And while she was a woman who could turn any situation to her advantage, how long could this go on? As Molly pondered her next move, one thing became clear. The Mercedes I had come to stay. Or had it? Palm Beach had seen it all. Extravagant parties, millionaire feuds, even discreetly covered-up political scandals. But a Venezuelan cargo ship stranded on a socialite's beach? That was new. Molly became so famous that she started receiving invitations to talk shows across the country. After all, who wouldn't want to hear the story of the woman who adopted a ship? News broadcasts showed images of Molly's mansion overshadowed by the massive ship, while anchors tried to explain how something like this could happen. Magazines featured Molly smiling next to the ship, as if it were a new addition to her eccentric collection of decor. And Molly knew exactly how to feed the public's curiosity. The Venezuelan crew, initially wary, quickly joined in on the fun. Molly made sure to offer them beachwear, because if they were going to be stranded, they might as well do it in style. Soon, they too were giving interviews, posing for photos, and even receiving gifts from tourists coming to see the spectacle firsthand. Meanwhile, the town of Palm Beach buzzed with gossip, and of course, Molly's neighbors, the ones who pretended to dislike her, were absolutely green with envy. After all, who needs a yacht when you've got a whole cargo ship? Of course, not everyone was entertained by Palm Beach's new tourist attraction. Local officials began pressuring Molly to resolve the situation. "Mrs. Wilmot, we need to take this seriously," one officer said, watching tourists snap selfies with the ship in the background. "Oh, darling, I'm taking this very seriously," Molly replied, flashing her signature smile. "Have you seen this week's Vogue cover?" But beneath the jokes, the situation was escalating. The Mercedes crew wasn't authorized to remain on the beach, the area's security was compromised, and the neighbors' patience was wearing thin. Officials even considered dismantling the ship on site. But the million-dollar question remained: who would pay for it? Molly, of course, had no intention of covering the costs. Instead, she had one thing on her mind: making the most of her newfound fame. While the authorities scrambled for a solution, Molly Wilmot was busy giving interviews and clinking champagne glasses with journalists eager for another outrageous headline. What started as a headline-grabbing event for Molly Wilmot soon became a massive headache, literally and figuratively. The parties around the ship continued. The press loved the story, and Molly seemed to be at the height of her popularity. But a nagging question loomed larger than the massive ship in her backyard. Who's going to pay for this mess? It didn't take long for the numbers to start rolling in, and they were far from friendly. Experts estimated that removing the giant rusting ship from Molly's beach would cost around $1 million, and that didn't even include potential property damage or the inevitable legal complications. $1 million? Molly gasped, her diamond-studded sunglasses almost slipping from her face. I didn't pay half that for this ring. And the cherry on top? The actual owner of the Mercedes E, a Venezuelan businessman, with no interest in solving the issue, conveniently vanished from the conversation. He declared bankruptcy, leaving the ship's fate and its hefty price tag in Molly's hands. At first, Molly joked that the ship was the largest freebie she'd ever received. But soon, that freebie started feeling more like a maritime curse, The socialite who had so far embraced the chaos with open arms started realizing the situation wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. Palm Beach authorities sent her legal notices. Her neighbors kept complaining about the smell of rust and oil that now lingered in the air, and the U.S. Coast Guard demanded a definitive solution. During a tense meeting with her advisors, Molly glanced out at the massive steel structure ruining her pristine view and sighed deeply. I can't decide if this is punishment or a gift. But if there was one thing Molly was known for, it was her resilience. If the ship was going to be part of her life, it had better serve a purpose. What if we turn this monstrosity into something good? She suggested, a mischievous smile spreading across her face. That's when Molly had the idea that would change everything, turning the Mercedes Afrique into an artificial reef. She contacted environmental preservation experts and proposed a plan to sink the ship in a controlled way, transforming it into a habitat for marine life. After all, if the ship wasn't going anywhere soon, why not make it useful for the ocean? The idea seemed promising, but as always, not everyone was convinced. An artificial reef? A local official asked, raising an eyebrow. Is this serious or just another one of your extravagant ideas, Mrs. Wilmot? Darling, when I do something, it's always serious and extravagant. Molly dove headfirst into the project. Soon, marine biologists, environmentalists, divers, and journalists were intrigued by the proposal. If successful, this maritime nightmare could become a landmark for both conservation and tourism. Molly was determined. If the Mercedes. I was going to be part of her story, then it had to leave a lasting impact. Thus began the most unexpected transformation in Palm Beach's history. The concept was simple on paper. Sink the ship in a controlled way so it could serve as an artificial reef, restoring marine biodiversity and attracting tourists and divers to the area. Think of it as a spa for fish, Molly joked during interviews. Who would have thought I'd end up helping marine life? Environmental groups quickly rallied behind the initiative. Local dive companies saw it as a golden opportunity, a new underwater attraction, for their excursions. For those unaware, artificial reefs provide habitats for fish, coral, and other marine life, helping restore damaged ecosystems. But, of course, nothing is ever that easy. While Molly envisioned the cargo ship as a future attraction, Palm Beach authorities saw it as a nuisance that needed to disappear, immediately. Palm Beach isn't a floating junkyard, Mrs. Wilmot, one council member said, pushing up his glasses in irritation. Molly, however, wasn't one to give up easily. If Palm Beach didn't want her nautical masterpiece, maybe another city would. That's when Fort Lauderdale entered the picture, seeing the Mercedes U as a golden opportunity to boost their own tourism industry. With the backing of local investors, plans to transfer the ship began to take shape, but the logistics would be daunting. After weeks of bureaucratic hurdles, endless meetings, and debates over who would foot the bill, the big day finally arrived. The Mercedes. I was set to be sunk and transformed into an artificial reef. Molly, ever the showwoman, turned the event into something resembling a Hollywood premiere. Reporters, photographers, and even a blimp circling overhead ensured no one missed the spectacle. If we're saying goodbye, let's do it in style, Molly declared, holding a glass of champagne as cameras snapped away. That morning, the skies were a pristine blue, as if the universe itself had decided to cooperate with Molly's grand finale. Dressed in her finest summer ensemble and understated jewelry, understated for her anyway, Molly greeted the press for one last hurrah. To top it off, Molly commissioned a special cocktail for the occasion. Molly's Follies, a mix of champagne and citrus, served chilled to all her guests. As the first charge of explosives was detonated, silence fell over the crowd. Then a deafening boom echoed, sending a massive spray of water into the air as the ocean claimed its new attraction. The Mercedes Eye, once a rusting eyesore, slowly descended beneath the waves, creating a breathtaking scene. Guests applauded as if they were watching a Broadway show. Who knew a pile of scrap metal could be so photogenic? Molly quipped as the ship vanished below the surface. Days after the sinking, divers explored the wreck of the Mercedes Wing, and to everyone's surprise, marine life was already beginning to thrive around it. Fish darted through its metal beams, and coral had started to attach itself to the ship's surface. News of the project's success spread like wildfire. For once, Molly's name wasn't just linked to parties or society columns, it was tied to something truly impactful. "Looks like my ship has finally found its place in the world," Molly said proudly, toasting at sunset. Today, the Mercedes Yacht is one of Florida's most visited artificial reefs, attracting divers from all over the world. Tourism in the area increased by over 40%, cementing Palm Beach and Molly Wilmot as icons of innovation and resilience. The sinking of the Mercedes. I was more than just the resolution of Molly Wilmot's unique predicament. It became a catalyst for change, inspiring environmental and cultural shifts in Florida and beyond. After the overwhelming success of the Mercedes Eye as an artificial reef, the idea quickly gained traction. While Palm Beach initially dismissed the ship as a nuisance, other cities saw its potential. In no time, coastal towns across Florida began planning their own artificial reefs. Molly, of course, didn't miss the chance to position herself as the godmother of the movement. At a press conference, because Molly loved nothing more than a good press event, she declared, "If a cargo ship in my backyard can save the ecosystem, imagine what an entire fleet could do." The results spoke for themselves. Within a few years, over 50 artificial reefs were established along the Florida coast, and the practice began spreading to other coastal states. Molly, with her natural charisma, was invited to environmental events and even received an award for her innovative contribution to marine conservation. She accepted it with her signature wit. "Who knew that dealing with a stranded ship would make me the savior of the oceans?" Palm Beach, which had initially turned its nose up at the Mercedes Sea, soon realized it had missed a golden opportunity to become the epicenter of the artificial reef movement. Inspired by Molly's success, the local government scrambled to create something just as iconic. The solution? They decided to sink a Rolls-Royce into the ocean to create a luxury artificial reef. Yes, you read that right. In 1985, a silver Rolls-Royce was carefully prepared and sunk off the coast of Palm Beach to serve as a new underwater attraction. Molly, of course, couldn't resist a cheeky comment. "Oh, a Rolls-Royce. Very elegant, but it lacks a certain drama, don't you think?" Despite the attempt, the Mercedes Eye remained the undisputed favorite among divers and conservationists. Its peculiar story, combined with the spectacle of its sinking, made it truly unforgettable. Years later, the Mercedes Eye still attracts thousands of visitors annually. Its submerged structure has become home to countless species of marine life, proving that a maritime disaster can be transformed into an ecological triumph. Divers from all over the world flock to the site, exploring the vibrant underwater habitat that has developed around the wreck. It's not just a destination for thrill seekers, it's a testament to what creativity and determination can achieve. In an interview, a marine biologist summed it up perfectly. "Molly took a disaster and turned it into a legacy. Who else could have done that?" Even after her death, Molly Wilmot's name lives on as a local legend. Her ability to transform chaos into opportunity, and to do it with style, has cemented her as one of Palm Beach's most unforgettable figures. There's something undeniably captivating about Molly's story. Maybe it's because she represents a side of human nature we all admire, the ability to take control of the uncontrollable. She didn't just accept the situation she was thrown into, she owned it. She didn't panic, she didn't hide. Instead, she invited the world to witness her handling the absurd with grace, humor, and a glass of champagne in hand. Her story continues to be told in books, documentaries, and even podcasts, often as an example of resilience and creativity in the face of unexpected challenges. Molly's life teaches us that sometimes the most unexpected challenges can lead to the greatest opportunities. She reminds us that even the most chaotic situations can have a silver lining. How we respond to problems defines their outcome. When life hands you a stranded cargo ship, serve champagne. Historians and environmentalists alike agree that Molly Wilmot's story is a rare blend of humor, ingenuity, and environmental progress. Today, the Mercedes Eye is more than just a sunken ship. It's a symbol a symbol of turning problems into opportunities, of thinking outside the box, and of finding beauty in unexpected places. Since the sinking of the Mercedes Ying, Florida's artificial reef program has flourished. The state now boasts one of the largest collections of artificial reefs in the world, attracting millions of tourists annually and providing a haven for marine life. The economic and environmental benefits of these reefs are undeniable, and did. All started with a stranded ship and a socialite who refused to let it ruin her day. If there's one thing Molly Wilmot's story teaches us, it's this. You can't always control what happens in life, but you can control how you respond to it. Her ability to transform an absurd and chaotic situation into a legendary tale is a reminder that challenges can often be disguised opportunities. And with that, I leave you with a question. What would you do if a giant problem landed in your backyard? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And before you go, check out the next video appearing on your screen. It's another unbelievable maritime tale you won't want to miss. A big hug, and I'll see you in the next sea story.